I fully accept now that the post office, excuse me, the post office knew that. I completely accepted the post office team working on the cases of the sub-postmasters. There were 136, I think, that went into the scheme and were being investigated. I had, and the board had been given the information that no issue had been found that had caused the problems for those sub-postmasters, either as a result of the Horizon system, or, and I'm sure in some cases that they had found something that the post office itself had not done correctly. But in my mind, I was of the understanding that the cases we were looking at were a minority, and the vast majority of those operating in the business had not encountered the same issues. That I wasn't saying...
Can I just test you on
yes.
your logic there? Why does that logic follow? There are lots of sub-postmasters for whom Horizon is working. We should concentrate on them. They're our priority, not the people for whom it's not working, who complain about a bug, error or defect.
Two responses to that, if I may. The latter one is we were concentrating on those who had raised issues individually, and that was part of the scheme.
That's not your priority, according to this.
Then this is this is badly worded because
why is it badly worded?
I'm juggling two priorities, and I'm only talking about one here.
You don't say that here. That would have been a more acceptable way to say things.
It would have been a more acceptable thing to say.
No doubt you wish you had, but you didn't.
No, I didn't.
You said our priority is to protect the people who aren't complaining.
That wasn't how I intended it to be read. We had just spent 3 years investigating with Second Sight, and I accept all of the things that went wrong through that process, which I'm sure we will come to. But we had prioritised more than any other time in the post office looking into issues raised by individuals. I had been told, and the inquirer has heard other people say the same, that nothing had been found. And so my understanding at this time was that the way the business was operating was an acceptable way. And what I was trying to say here is that we needed to make sure that the business as it was operating remained a priority for us. I wasn't excluding the other, but it can be read that way, and I accept it.
Was this a message that was also disseminated within the business, and in particular to those who worked the help desks, when they responded to calls from distressed sub-postmasters? The system works for everyone else. It's just you that's the problem, not the system.
Oh, no. There's no way that the organisation would have disseminated something like that. The people who worked in the call centres, and I visited on a number of occasions and listened into calls, were very keen to make sure that they gave the help to the people who phoned in. But I am very sorry, because I'm very aware that so many sub-postmasters phoned in so many times and didn't, and we're talking over a 20-year period, but phoned in so many times and were not given the help they needed.
Well, worse than that, they were told that you're the problem, the sub-postmaster.
Yes, I've heard
You're
that.
the only person that's complaining about this.
I have heard that. I can't comment on individual cases, and I'm very sorry that was the case.
Separately, by this time, August 15, you hadn't seen the Clark advice of the 15th of July about Gareth Jenkins, 2013, but you had, I think, been made aware that there was a problem with the Fujitsu expert, which problem could create a duty of further disclosure that might undermine past criminal convictions. I'm summarising what you say in your statement.
Yes, yes.
Was that not a cause for concern when there were repeated complaints in respect of Horizon? i.e., I've been told that there has been an issue raised about the evidence given by the Fujitsu expert, which may create a duty of further disclosure. Why would your priority still be on protecting the business in the light of that?
My priority, I had a number of priorities as chief executive. To your question about the Simon Clarke advice and Gareth Jenkins, the way that had been explained to me was that Gareth Jenkins had not disclosed, and I can't remember whether it was 1 or 2 bugs, which were not relevant to the case that he had been giving evidence on. And I can remember a conversation with Leslie Sewell very clearly, because she was incredibly frustrated that he was now going to be stood down as what we understood at the time to be an expert witness, having not shared information which was not relevant to a case. And the logic didn't seem to stand scrutiny, but what was explained by the lawyers is that because he had done that, he then had to be stood down. I don't think that had any...
Sorry, just we're going to come back to this in detail
right,
whilst you're on it. Is that your memory of it?
Yes.
Of what you were told?
Yes.
That this was completely illogical? Why are we standing down this Fujitsu man?
Yes, I had 2 conversations. I don't know if you want to cover that now or later.
Well, just briefly now to get your evidence. Neither of these conversations are documented, correct?
I think they're in my statement, actually.
Yeah.
Yes,
What you said now.
There's no further documentation
No.
of them, no. So the first I learned was I bumped into Leslie Sewell in the corridor. She was looking particularly grumpy, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I've just found out that..." And I didn't remember the name, and there's documentation that shows I didn't, but that she probably would have said that the Fujitsu expert had been stood down because he hadn't disclosed 2 bugs which were not relevant in a case where he had given evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I then had a further conversation with Susan Crichton to say, this doesn't quite make sense to me. Why is he being stood down? And she explained that there was a duty of disclosure now, that what we had to do was to go back over the cases where he had given evidence and inform them of this event.
And just, again, capturing things, we know that there was a written advice
Yes.
from an independent barrister.
Yes.
Do you know why neither of them said, "Paula, it's all explained here," which would have told you a very different story?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea, and I find it unacceptable.
Do you think they were trying to protect you from information that you would find difficult to hear?
No.
We best not tell the boss.
No, absolutely not.
Because the account that you've given is very different from what the documents reveal.
Yes, I agree. I should have seen them. The board should have seen them. Susan Crichton explained to the inquiry that it was not the way of working in the post office to disclose legal advice as they should have been. And to your point about people hiding bad news from me, no. On the contrary, I put in place a campaign at one stage which was called Bad News is Good News, to encourage people to come to share difficult information, because it's very important when you're running an organisation, particularly at the level of chief executive, that sort of information is shared with you.
Can I move to my 5th topic then, please? You knew, that can come down that document, thank you. You knew and worked very closely with Alistair Cameron for a number of years, didn't you?
Yes.
And presumably you trusted him.
Yes.
He told us last week, from the time that he joined the business, that's January 15, until the time that you left, that's April 2019, that you did not believe that there had been any miscarriages of justice. In his words, quote, "You could not get there emotionally." Did you believe, right up until the point at which you left the business, that there had been no miscarriages of justice?
I was told multiple times, and I'm very aware of the questions that have been asked around the Select Committee in 2015, that there had been no evidence found. The inquiry heard from Patrick Bork, I think last week or the week before, where Fujitsu records had been checked to see if there was a scar and everything was golden. I was told that there had been, that nothing had been found.
So is the answer that you did believe, right until you left the business in April 2019, that there had been no miscarriages of justice?
I think that's right.
Was that because you could not, at an emotional level, reach the opposite view?
No, you will see there are 2 or 3 examples in documentation where even in 2016, I received a communication from Tim McCormack, who I did speak to or communicate with. And Tim pointed out that that Mrs. Misra's case had now been referred, I think, or the police had been brought in to look at whether post office investigators had not operated correctly in her case. I don't remember the detail, and I don't think there was matters of detail in his email. I immediately reacted to that by asking Tom Weschler to look into it, and in the email I say, I want you to suspend any, these may not be the right words, but I want you to suspend any judgment around Sparrow, and that we will take whatever conclusion comes from this. What actually happened is that Mrs. Misra's case had gone to the CCRC, and so that it was left with the CCRC to look through. But no, absolutely not.
So Mr. Cameron's wrong to suggest that you believed there had been no miscarriages of justice because you could not reach the opposite view at an emotional level.
You can't be a chief executive and rely solely on your emotions, no.
Mr. Cameron told us that you were clear in your conviction from the day he joined until the day that you left, that nothing had gone wrong. Is that correct? Was that your belief?
I don't think he's right in that view.
Were you clear in your convictions that nothing had gone wrong in your time at the post office, so far as Horizon was concerned and the prosecution of sub-postmasters was concerned?
No, not at all. There were problems with Horizon all the way through my tenure.
Mr. Cameron told us that you never deviated from or seemed to doubt that. Is that right, that you never deviated from your path?
No, he's completely wrong.
Can we turn, please, to JARB 601? These are the notes of a meeting between you, we can just see you at the foot of the screen there, other post office personnel, and a group of MPs, including Lord Arbuthnot. Yes?
Yes.
It's dated the 18th of June 2012. And can we look, please, at page 2, where you're recorded as saying, Paula Vennells continued, she said that temptation is an issue, but that trust in the post office brand is absolutely paramount. The post office needs competent, trustworthy people on staff, and its processes and systems must be transparent and work well. Of the 1,800 sub-postmasters and mistresses currently employed, only a tiny number are presenting cases where there is an issue of alleged fraud involving the Horizon system. The problem, therefore, is relatively small.
I think
Horizon
you actually said 1,800, but it's 11,800.
Thank you, sir. The problem is, therefore, relatively small. The Horizon system is very secure. Every keystroke used by anyone using the system is recorded and auditable. When things go wrong in a sub-post office, there is a helpline which staff can call 7 days per week during office hours, and backup staff who will help further if things go wrong. It's here that issues are normally resolved. It appears that some sub-postmasters have been borrowing money from the post office account or till in the same way they might do in a retail business, but this isn't how the post office works. Post office cash is public money, and the post office must recover it if any goes missing. And then this, every case taken to prosecution that involves the Horizon system thus far has found in favour of the post office. And then a similar line, if we can remember that one, to go over to page 3. just at the foot of the screen there, you are recorded as saying, going back to Andrew Brigham's question, there had not been a case investigated where the Horizon system had been found to be at fault. Is what we read here, every case taken to prosecution has found in favour of the Post Office, there hasn't been a case investigated where the Horizon system has been found to be at fault, a reflection of the unwavering belief that Mr. Cameron spoke about, that nothing had gone wrong, there had been no miscarriages of justice, and you refused to deviate from those lines?
It isn't a representation of that. It is, though, a representation of the information that I was given. In, I think, January 2012, the General Counsel told the Board exactly this, and the inquiry has seen this statement, I think, made by other colleagues. It was an understanding in the organisation which I now know is completely incorrect.
You know it's incorrect because you know that by the time you were speaking here, Nicola Arch, the branch manager at Chalford Hill Post Office in Stroud, Gloucestershire, having been accused of stealing £24,000, had been acquitted by a jury in April 2012, having blamed Horizon for the alleged shortfalls at her branch, don't you?
I didn't know that information.
You know now.
I know now, yes.
You know now that Maureen McKelvey, the sub-postmistress at Clannabogan in Omagh, accused of stealing £30,000, had been acquitted by a jury, having blamed Horizon for the cause of losses of money of which she was accused of stealing. You know that now.
I know that now.
You know now that Susan Palmer, the sub-postmistress at Grange Post Office in Rayleigh, had been acquitted by a jury in January 2007, Mrs. Palmer having blamed Horizon at trial for the losses said to have been attributable to her. Why were you telling these parliamentarians that every prosecution involving the Horizon system had been successful and had found in favour of the Post Office?
I fully accept now that the Post Office, excuse me, the Post Office knew that. I completely accepted. Personally, I didn't know that, and I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to those people and to so many others.
You'd received a detailed briefing for the purposes of this meeting, hadn't you?
Yes, I had.
There had been successive drafts of a briefing pack prepared for you. And it was about 20 pages long, the briefing pack.
Yes, I can remember it.
Can we look, please, at poll 309 6640? This is the final version of the briefing pack for this very meeting. We're familiar with it. If we go to page 2, we can see the agenda and how the meeting was chunked up, who was going to speak to which issue. And you were going to speak at point 3 to the background.
Yeah.
And then if we go over the page to page 3, we can see what Alice Perkins was going to deliver as key messages. And then over the page to page 4, we can see your section.
Yeah.
Yes? Topic 3, background. And we can see all of the bullet points in detail on that page, yes?
Yes.
Where does it say there that every case taken to prosecution that involves the Horizon system has been found in favour of the Post Office?
I'm not sure that it does it?
It doesn't.
No.
Where does it say there that there had not been a case investigated where the Horizon system had been found to be at fault?
I don't see it.
Where does it say there anything about temptation and sub-postmasters having their hands in the till, treating it like a retail business?
That, I remember, was discussed in the meeting.
Yes, where does it say it here?
If it isn't there, Mr. Beer, I take your
Where
word
does it
for
say here that every keystroke is recorded?
I believe that was picked up by Leslie Sewell.
Yes, where does it say here?
If it isn't there, it isn't there.
No. So why are the things that postmasters have been led into temptation, that every case that has been prosecuted we've won, not appear in your briefing for this meeting, but are the very things that you said to this group of parliamentarians?
When you're in a meeting, you take the briefing in with you, and then you supplement it or raise things that you consider also appropriate in the meeting.
Isn't the purpose of a briefing that it's gone through a process, that the right people have been involved in it? I mean, we've seen the back issues of this, the email exchanges between the relevant people, IT and legal, to get the key messages recorded right. Are you saying that you put this to one side and you freestyle in the meeting?
No, not at all. I would have used the briefing and I would have added in, as anybody does, I think, given a briefing, to further information that I thought was relevant. What I did want to see, because I can see Mrs. Hamilton sitting there, is that I did not realise at the time, when the details of her case were presented in this meeting, that the Post Office had more detail in the prosecution file than was shared with us at the time, and I'm very sorry about that.
This is the next day, the Saturday, the 12th, and it's 9:01 in the morning, and you are emailing a group of people. I'm not going to read the chain. But in the third bullet point, under some questions, you say, I possibly heard, but may be confusing with a previous case, that Martin had some mental health issues. How do you possibly hear something?
I think I'm simply stating an uncertainty.
You say you might be confusing it with a previous case. Why were you saying this at all if you might be confusing Mr. Griffiths' case with another case?
I'm trying to make sure, I believe, that there isn't confusion. I shared with you earlier that I spoke to the father of a previous colleague, and it may be that I was recalling that.
In your witness statement, there's no need to turn it up. It's paragraph 675 on page 317. You say, I was very aware of the background to suicide. It can be complex and is sometimes not apparent until long after the fact. And there's often a desire by those closely affected by such a death to look for an explanation. By telling us that, is your evidence that you were looking to explain Mr. Griffiths' death for the benefit of his family, and that's why you were asking these questions?
No, I was simply trying to get to understand whether what Mr. Bates had suggested, which is that the Post Office, i.e. colleagues in the Post Office, had been responsible for Mr. Griffiths' death.
And his sister had said the same.
And his sister had said the same, yes.
You knew it was the family's view that Mr. Griffiths had taken his own life because it had been ruined by the Post Office, didn't you?
I did see that, yes.
You had just been told about his death, and you were trying to get on the front foot here, weren't you?
No. No, Mr. Beer, that was not the case.
You were trying to find out information. You were tasking the team with finding out information to counter any narrative that the post office was to blame, weren't you?
No, Mr. Beer, I've said that, and you've seen that I asked about the family, and as there are other emails which go through trying to find some payment for Mrs. Griffiths as well. What I was trying to do, quite simply, it was to get the wider picture and not to be, and to understand particularly the very difficult challenges that Mr. Bates had levelled at some post office colleagues.
Thank you. That can come down. Lastly, by way of general questions, I just want to ask you briefly about recollection and failures in recollection. Without turning them up, you say at paragraph 358 of your witness statement in relation to correspondence with Simon Baker and Alwyn Lyons, I'm just picking some examples here. If the conversation was about the bugs, I don't know if I was told about them on that date or later. Paragraph 424, you say you cannot recall what steps were taken to ensure that Second Sight had been informed what Post Office knew about the bug. Paragraph 773, you say, I do not recall the Simon Clark advices being discussed or provided to the board. And they're examples where you say throughout your statements that you lack recollection in relation to facts that might be damaging to the Post Office. Yes? In your witness statement, however, would this be right? You have no problem remembering things that put responsibility or attribute blame to others. So paragraph 192, you say there was a further conversation that isn't noted. I remember that this reassured me that the issue had been resolved. Paragraph 566, I recall telling Susan this was a stupid thing for John Scott to have done. This was in relation to the statement that weekly meetings should be not recorded or that the minutes should be shredded. Paragraph 571, I asked Susan a number of questions about the removal of the Fujitsu expert witness. Why is it that you can remember things that are exculpatory of you, that tend to diminish your blameworthiness?
No, I don't believe that's the way I approach my statement at all, or any of the work to the inquiry. I've approached it with the intention of integrity and truth and honesty.
Why is it that in your witness statement, when you refer to a recollection of a conversation that's unminuted, undocumented, not referred to in any email, there are always things that exculpate you, that reduce your blameworthiness?
That isn't the approach I've taken.
Some might say that that has been an approach by others who have given evidence in the inquiry. They have great difficulty in remembering things unless it paints them in a favourable light. Was there an issue, a systemic issue in the Post Office, that people only looked to the good and forgot the bad?
No, I can't comment on other people, and I give you my word, as I've said earlier today, that I will respond in complete truth to this inquiry and have done in my statement. So my approach to this is, I hope, with integrity. Within the Post Office itself, I don't recollect that, and you've already mentioned that there was a positive culture in the organisation of lessons learned. I introduced something...
I don't think I've said that.
No, sorry, you didn't say positive culture. You mentioned lessons learned.
Yeah.
I'm explaining that was a culture in the Post Office, and there was a positive intention behind that, which was to learn lessons all of the time. I mentioned that I encouraged bad news is good news, and you will see in inquiry documentation that the word pre-mortem is used very often. And that was an attempt to, both from lessons learned, to read into actions going forwards where things might go wrong. So there was an intention from my leadership, certainly, and I believe the people I worked with, to look for and learn from mistakes.
Thank you. Can I turn then to your background and general knowledge of issues at the Post Office? I think you worked for the Post Office for 12 years in total, is that right?
That's right.
You joined in January 2007.
Yes.
You were made Managing Director in October 2010.
Yes,
And you left as CEO in April 2019.
I did.
On a point of detail, whilst we're dealing with that chronology, when Alan Cook gave evidence last month, he suggested that you may have signed off on the Post Office spending some £300,000 in costs, pursuing a £26,000 debt said to be owed by Lee Castleton. The main hearing in Mr. Castleton's case took place between the 6th and the 13th of January 2006, with the judgment being handed down on the 13th of January 2007. I think you joined the Post Office in the same month, January
I did,
2007.
and so I couldn't possibly, I wasn't there to sign off that money. I hadn't joined the organisation. His recollection is incorrect.
So it follows, I think, that you were not responsible for signing off the very substantial legal spend in that case.
No.
Thank you. In terms of your previous career before joining the Post Office, is it right that noticeable features of it are that you had no experience of managing a large IT team,
That's correct.
and you had no experience of an organisation which investigated or prosecuted its staff?
That's correct.
You say in your witness statement on a number of occasions that you put to the fore the suffering of the sub-postmasters. And you say, by comparison, the Post Office's own reputation was of small import or importance compared to protecting the trust built up daily by colleagues working in post offices across the country.
That's correct.
That's
the
paragraph.
two are connected. But
That's paragraph 47. And in your statement, you refer numerous times to the importance of protecting public money.
yes,
That's paragraphs 40, 48B, 265B, 270, 383, and 736. Were you preoccupied with the notion of protecting public money?
not preoccupied with it, no, but as part of the governance of working for a public sector organisation, there is a document called Managing Public Money. And when I joined the Royal Mail in 2007, I remember being surprised at how often that was spoken about. But of course it's because it was important, because all public organisations are funded through public money.
In your statement, you refer on numerous occasions to the importance of the Post Office's reputation and brand. Paragraphs 47, 270, 293, 416B, 437, 454, 455, 456, 458, 460D, 467C, and 470D. Were you preoccupied with the need to protect the Post Office's reputation and brand?
Yes, but not to the extent of putting that over and above the suffering of the sub-postmasters. And
Did you know they were suffering?
I understood. That's a difficult question to answer because the answer is yes and no. I understood from clearly if people were being prosecuted, that was a very difficult thing. And the reason that we put in place the review with Second Sight and then the complaint and mediation scheme was to look into that. I wasn't personally aware at the time because I wasn't involved in the prosecutions. But I would like to say that, and I do say this in my statement, whenever I spoke about the Post Office brand, it was a brand that was only ever built up through post offices. And it was a very strong belief of mine, which I mentioned at conferences and meetings, The Post Office Limited, as a corporate entity, there was no reason to build that as a brand. The reason customers came to the post office and people chose to work for it was because of the wonderful work that was done in post offices across the country and still is every day. And that was the brand I was talking about. In fact, when I became chief executive, people used to call the corporate entity they work for POL. And I said, no, we work for the post office. Post offices are why we are here. So brand was absolutely important, but in the sense of the local post offices.
You just said that you did not put brand and reputation above the postmasters' suffering. What suffering were they undergoing?
We have heard through the inquiry, I sat through the human impact statements.
No,
I'm sorry.
You were telling us that at the time you did not put the post office's brand or reputation above the postmaster's suffering.
In terms of a personal approach, I don't ever recall that being a motivation. I can see with hindsight that there will be many examples of where that is clearly the case, because the post office got this very wrong.
You tell us in paragraph 49 of your witness statement that when you joined the post office, you had no understanding of the board's responsibility for the oversight of criminal investigations or prosecutions.
I'm sorry, say the beginning
Yes.
of that again?
When you joined the post office in
Yes.
2007, you had no understanding of the board's responsibility for the oversight of criminal investigations or prosecutions.
That's correct.
And nor did, in fact, you appreciate, you say, even that it brought its own prosecutions.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yes. So some of them referred to, as we discussed earlier, the approach and the style of investigators. Some of them referred to issues with the Horizon system. And in a number of cases, they spoke about the impacts on them and their families, that financially, the dreadful impacts on some people. And as I think I said here, the clarity of the form really, it was very disturbing and upsetting reading. And what I wanted to do, having read these, was to share them with colleagues, just so that everybody knew the seriousness of what we were dealing with. This was at the very beginning stage of the mediation scheme, so these were the applications before any of the reviews had taken place. But I just wanted people to understand the impact on people's lives.
They refer to a very wide range of issues, including a series of faults with Horizon, didn't they?
Yes, I can't remember the detail now, but yes.
Problems with misbalancing and shortfalls being wrongly attributed to sub-postmasters. Civil proceedings being taken against sub-postmasters, including Lee Castleton, resulting in his bankruptcy. Consequent impacts upon family and children.
Yes.
Some complaining, in particular, Noel Thomas, about his wrongful conviction and the impact that had on him and his family. Complaints about training, complaints about the helpline. Essentially all of the things that were subsequently established by the two judgments of Mr. Justice Fraser.
Yes, and all of the things that the complaints and mediation scheme was going to look into. And the other thing, if I may, that I would like to say, because I've heard very recently that sub-postmasters saw the use of numbers, so these cases were anonymised, because of the sensitivity of all of that information. The Post Office was very concerned that it didn't share it, and I think there was a team of 20 or so an investigation team looking into this as part of the scheme. and so names were removed. But I am really sorry. There was no intention at all for sub-postmasters to become numbers in this case. It was actually the opposite, but I appreciate the points that have been made recently on that.
You said that you found these very disturbing and that you defied anyone not to.
Yes.
What happened between you finding these 8 cases very disturbing and you shutting down the mediation scheme? When did they cease to become very disturbing?
All the cases that came into the mediation scheme were by their nature disturbing. My purpose in circulating these was from a it was from a point of view of compassion.
What system?
That the colleagues working on them and those who... There were many questions in the there were questions in the organisation at a board and a group executive level about whether, and this is in documentation, this was a distraction of management time. When I read these reports, it seemed to me that this was an important distraction of management time, and that any colleague who might think that this was not a good use of money to be invested by Post Office and time invested in investigating it was clearly wrong. And I wanted to make sure that there was no misunderstanding about that. To your question about what happened between them and standing down Second Sight, this was the ambition, was to look at all of these cases in as much detail as possible, and my understanding was that is what the team were doing. Second Sight and the Post Office team went through my understanding was they went through the details of these cases. This is right at the very beginning where we're simply dealing with application forms. And by the time Second Sight was stood down in 2015, I think, the view was that nothing had been found, that where the Post Office had looked at each case, there were explanations, and we were still waiting, I think, when Second Sight were initially stood down, for them to finish some of the reports. They then finished the reports, and the responses that I and the board and other senior management had back was that in every case there was an explanation for what had happened, and we would then go into mediation. And where we were dealing with cases that had been through the courts, they were going through the Criminal Cases Review Commission and could then go through a form of appeal if postmasters felt that was an appropriate next step to do.
Did the Post Office use a series of tactics and systems to iron away these very disturbing complaints over the next 18 months?
That was not my understanding.
How was it that what struck you as very disturbing complaints ended up as being without substance?
My understanding was that every complaint was looked at in detail. They were reinvestigated. Information from Fujitsu was sought, data was looked at. Second Sight, I know on 1 or 2 occasions, and this sounds very hollow now, I am very, very sorry, but complimented the Post Office on the standard and the detail of the investigation. And it's completely unacceptable and deeply sad, and I am very sorry that we didn't reach the right conclusion on these cases.
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment. Might we break, please, until 2:15?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.